Hey, I'm Mike Gilliam, and welcome to Let It Rip. We're coming to you from the CUNY TV studios in the shadow of the Empire State Building in New York City. The midterm elections are quickly approaching, and there's a lot at stake. Republicans look at the midterms as a chance to take control of the House and the evenly divided Senate, and have promised a sea of investigations if they're successful at the ballot box. Democrats see the midterms as crucial and know that they will determine the success of the Biden administration's prospects over the final 2 years of his first term and whether or not they'll retain the presidency in 2024. When voters go to the polls in November, a number of key issues, in addition to the economy, will be on their minds. One is reproductive rights, and whether a woman will still have access to abortions or if those rights will be stripped away. For a look at the reproductive rights issue, we have two guests: CUNY School of Law Professor and former Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Natalie Gomez-Velez, and the co-director of the Human Rights and Gender Justice Clinic at CUNY Law School, and the co-editor of the Reproductive Rights Professor blog, Cynthia Soohoo. This is Let It Rip. Cynthia, let's start right off with you. Are we headed back to the bad old days here?
Yeah, I feel like we're headed to the bad old days, or maybe worse, right? This is the first, it's kind of shocking that the Supreme Court, after 50 years, would actually consider overturning Roe versus Wade. And what we're seeing is really a ferocity of really anti-choice legislation, some of it which is incredibly extreme. Oklahoma, Alabama, other states have passed laws already that ban abortion from conception.
I don't know, Natalie, how did all of this happen? It almost seems like we're on the verge of being governed by the minority here.
I think that's absolutely right. And this is the result of years and years of effort using the levers of government that allow minority interests to kind of infiltrate. And I think the place where it really happened was the focus on the Supreme Court, right, as a locus of where you could overturn the will of the majority. And we saw that with the former administration, the Trump administration, appointing 3, they say, very conservative justices who were really put there for the purpose of, among other things, overturning Roe versus Wade and, doing a lot of other damage to well-settled law and legal principles.
I know, Cynthia, it seems to me that as we had these other people who were added to the court, there are a couple of stalwarts in there who are also leading this charge, Alito and Clarence Thomas.
That's right. Yeah, Clarence Thomas really has been against the right to abortion for years, and has always been in dissent on cases reaffirming Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, what was your reaction when you first heard about the leak?
I was shocked in 2 ways. First, the leak itself, to my knowledge, was unprecedented. You don't hear of that kind of leak coming out of the Supreme Court, right? It's known for really keeping close to the vest where the cases are going, what the justices are thinking. And then the opinion itself was so extreme that it was well beyond even the bad news that I know I was expecting, which was that the court was going to try somehow to uphold Mississippi's 15-week ban, which is bad enough because it does away with the viability line in Roe versus Wade. But this was far worse. I mean, this was just basically saying we're overruling Roe and Casey and we're leaving it to the states. They're wrong from the beginning. It completely ignored a lot of the reasoning that was brought up both on stare decisis, on the reasons why Roe and Casey shouldn't be overruled, and the implications for women across the country. Just ignored all of that and has this list of statutes from the 1860s and basically was saying, let's just go back there.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of interesting, that whole thing about the viability rule, because I guess that might have changed a little bit with the science, correct?
Not really. If you listen to the oral arguments, Justice Sotomayor has a back and forth with the attorney for Mississippi, where she says, not a lot really has changed, right? Viability is around 23, 24 weeks. And that's why the 15-week ban was problematic, because if the court said, which is where Chief Justice Roberts seemed to want to go, well, what's wrong with a 15-week ban? What's wrong with that is it erases the viability rule. And that rule was really designed to balance, right, the woman's interest in woman being able to determine early in her pregnancy whether to continue or terminate a pregnancy with what has been called the state's interest in the potential life. And so viability is when the fetus can live on its own, so that that interest is balanced against the women's interest. And a lot of people feel like Roe and Casey kind of settled that tension, and this upends all of that.
Mm-hmm. When you talk to women out there, Cynthia, what are you hearing from them about their concerns over this?
Right. Well, I mean, I think people are rightly concerned that we're rolling back 50 years of precedent, right? A Supreme Court case that really has guaranteed the right, people's right to control their body, their bodily autonomy, their ability to decide whether or not to become pregnant. But I think it's important to recognize that even before we got to this place, before this threat of overturning Roe versus Wade, for a lot of people, they already don't have access to abortion. And that's because even under the current standard, which is incredibly important, Roe versus Wade is an incredibly important Supreme Court case which prohibits the state from making abortion illegal prior to viability. But we know that making something legal doesn't necessarily mean that people have access to that right. So even going back to 1973, the states and the federal government have passed laws that have made it increasingly impossible for people to really access abortion. And so these are laws that prohibit the federal government from making Medicaid funding available for people. These are laws that the states have been passing for years and years and years that make it difficult for abortion providers to stay in business. These are laws that actually aren't related to health, but are really targeting them to shut them down. So already, even before this threat to Roe versus Wade, there were many, many women who couldn't actually have access to abortion. So I think this, though, this idea that the states can actually make it illegal or criminal, I think is just like the final nail in the coffin.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've read recently is that there are some out there who are saying, not that big a deal. There can be access to medical abortions through medicine, that sort of thing. You would be able to get that through the internet. You could get that from overseas, that sort of thing. What do you make of that argument?
I think that is one difference between now and the pre-Roe days, but I think whenever you make abortion illegal, what you're doing is you're forcing people to get services outside of the established medical establishment. And that always creates dangers. I think that the fact that medication abortion that you might, if you get pills on the internet or from friends, I think would be safer than other historic methods of ending your own pregnancy. But I think it's going to make it difficult for people to get, it's still going to be difficult for people to get access. I think the other thing is that we're seeing an increasing openness to criminalizing people who have abortions, right? So if you use medication abortion and you have complications or you want to go to the doctor, people aren't going to want to go to the doctor, right? So I think, and the other thing is medication abortion really is only recommended by the FDA up till 10 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. So people outside of 10 weeks couldn't use it. But I think that the other thing is a lot of these laws purport to have exceptions for women's for abortions that are necessary to save the life of women. But in fact, what we know from other countries is those types of exceptions don't work, because we see, like in Oklahoma, one of the laws creates criminal penalties. So if a doctor performs an illegal abortion, they can be sentenced up to 10 years in jail, right? And so they can only provide an abortion if a woman's life is in danger. So they're going to always be thinking about whether or not someone's going to be looking over their shoulder later and saying, that woman's life wasn't in danger enough.
Mm-hmm. Some states have moved to try to protect the rights. New York State has done that. Have they done enough here?
I think that, I feel like New York actually is one of the leaders. Money was made available to safeguard clinics to make sure that they're safe from violent protests and harassment. I think I know New York City has in the past made money available for people who travel from out of state. And I think last week Governor Hochul signed a bunch of bills that were really designed to make sure that doctors and medical providers who are seeking patients who come from out of state are protected from harassment.
Natalie, what would you like to see the Biden administration do at the national level, given the situation we're in right now?
There's really reliance on Congress, right? And you saw that the House passed a bill that would codify Roe versus Wade, and they went to the Senate, and 49-51 did not make it. Can't get the 60 votes past this filibuster, couldn't even get the 50 50. I think it was Senator Manchin that didn't go with it. They couldn't get Senators Collins and Murkowski even to sign on to this bill. So it's really limited, and what it does is it leaves it to the states, and you really have this circumstance where what you're seeing is it kind of tears the states apart, right? Where states are jockeying, pro-choice, anti-choice, and folks really have to be thinking in terms of, it's going to be testing a number of areas of law that have been kind of dormant about what are the relationships among the states, right, with respect to differences in terms of criminal laws, and if you go from one state to the next. It's going to be a lot of legal tests.
Okay, that's going to have to be the last word on that. A very good conversation on an extremely important topic that's going to play a role in the upcoming midterm elections. I want to thank our guests, CUNY School of Law Professor and former Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Natalie Gomez-Velez, and the co-director of the Human Rights and Gender Justice Clinic at CUNY Law School and the co-editor of the Reproductive Rights Professor blog, Cynthia Soohoo. Thank you to both of you. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll look at another issue that promises to play a role in the midterms, the effort to curb raging violence across the country. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to Let It Rip. I'm Mike Gilliam. As we head to the midterms this fall, another issue that could sway voters at the ballot box is pervasive gun violence, both here and across the country. Here in the city, Mayor Eric Adams ran his campaign largely focusing on cracking down on crime and guns, and he won. But even though the NYPD under his administration says they've gotten more than 3,000 guns off the streets, every day there are headlines splashed across our papers focusing on gun violence in our streets. There's also the issue of mass shootings occurring all over the country, often carried out with assault weapons. Here in the city, the mayor is taking a proactive approach. He's using law enforcement to go after guns and crime in the subways, and he's trying to interrupt the violence at the community level. He's appointed A.T. Mitchell as the co-chair of his new gun crime prevention task force. A.T., welcome.
Pleasure to be here with you, Mike. How you doing?
Good, good. Good to have you here. How's this task force going to work?
It's going to work because I'm actually co-chairing this task force with Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright. And alongside the other, first deputy mayors and other commissioners and, the chancellor, the school chancellor and others who are going to be around this table to help us make sure that we pretty much deploy everything that we have in our arsenal. I believe it's going to work because this is unprecedented. This has never happened before. In a city as rich as New York City has been over the years, we have billions of dollars of resources in each of the city agencies that have difficulty oftentimes making its way into the neighborhoods where it's needed most. And so that for the first time, the community is not just on the menu, but actually at the table. And I would represent their voice. I've been in the community for over 30 years, knowing the issues and being a part of the problem at once in my life, now being a part of the solution. So I believe and have a lot of great confidence that this will work.
Mm-hmm. You talked about your years of experience. 30 years. You founded an organization called Man Up that dealt with this issue.
Yes.
Tell me about that organization, how it worked, and just tell me about it.
Yeah, so just like I said, as a young activist, being out there already involved in the community, in 2003, unfortunately, there was a shooting of an 8-year-old whose name is Deshaun Hill. Mm-hmm. And he and his little brother and sister and his stepdad were on their way home, and they didn't know on their block there was a beef amongst individuals that ended with them in a shootout. And unfortunately, Deshaun was the victim, one of the two victims of that shootout. He was 8 years old. We really was heartbroken to hear that there was a child that was shot. For me, I really got angry. I got angry with our community. I got angry with our city. And I led a charge amongst other members of my community to go around to the young people in the streets and try to, talk to them. And in that, I learned that there was the same issues that they faced was the issues that I faced growing up in Brownsville in East New York. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any place for them to go. There wasn't anyone trying to give them any chances at life and trying to help them with job training or giving them jobs. They actually just resulted to do what they could, and that was loitering and selling drugs on the street. So, and when I learned that, I figured there was an opportunity that I, could maybe broker some sort of peace treaty with them. And I said, in fact, if I help you, could you help us? If I came to you with those resources, those opportunities, if I advocated on your behalf to the people in the city that we exist, would you be willing to exchange us with some peace? And they agreed. Okay. And so that's how Man Up Inc. got started. We started in a basement, a donated space that was given to us in one of the areas in East New York. And we just began to do everything that we could. We did after-school programs from that very start.
So walk me through, though, an intervention. What is it that you actually do when you go to young people and say, hey, we're going to stop the violence?
Yes, sir.
How do you do that?
Well, it's about our approach. First and foremost is how you approach them, right? You have to approach them actually with respect. You have to be non-threatening, of course. And you have to have some care. You have to show that you literally have a heart for them. Once they can read that you're coming in peace, and you actually are not there to disrupt whatever they're doing, they will let you in. They'll give you about 30 seconds. And so you got 30 seconds to explain what you want from them and they from you. And from there, that's the beginning. And I think, again, if people learn just how to approach them in that manner, that's the beginning. Not walk by them, not ignore them, not write them off or rid them off like as if, eventually they'll get caught. But learn how to just simply approach them with respect, with dignity, and with some care in your heart. And then they will open up. Because, Mike, the overwhelming majority of them that we see portrayed on television are good young people. They're not as troubled as people make them out or dangerous as people make them out. If anything, they are victims of society.
Do you have to separate yourself from law enforcement, though, to make this work?
Well, in a way, yes, because you don't want to come off as if you're law enforcement. Unfortunately, the bridge between community and police is very much blown up. And so law enforcement is not viewed as it once was in the past, in the present. So yes, you can't approach them as if you are law enforcement. That's why people like myself are known as credible messengers. We are the people who we have the influence that they trust, are not trying to get them to kind of be turned over to the police, but we're trying to get to them before they have to be a case to the police.
There's a narrative out there that all this violence is gang-related. Is that true?
Well, partially it is gang-related, but not at the initial stage. Most of the majority of what we see played out are interpersonal disputes. These incidences, they start at very small incidences where people may miscommunicate. These are things that can be squashed, things that can be mediated. But when they go uninterrupted, eventually what happens is people get in contact with other people who may be gang affiliated. And so then the gang people show up and then they act out in that manner. And then the way that it's reported as if it's a gang-related crime. But that's not actually how it started. Most of the disputes and incidences that we see are really interpersonal, things that are mediatable, things that can be interrupted and squashed if we get to it before it even explodes.
Do you monitor social media?
We definitely do e-responding. We do a lot of social media monitoring because that's where our young people are, and if that's where they are, that's where we have to go. We have to go anywhere that they are. And so we have a lot of our members of our teams across the city that are trained to know how to monitor the social medias of the people that we work with and to detect if there is a problem brewing and interrupt it even online, even in the inbox sections of their social media accounts. We have the ability to post things that may be contrary to promoting violence. We have to promote peace. So yes, we do a lot of stuff on
Give me an example of what you might post.
The beef, your guys are arguing over something that is not worth it. It might be, let's talk about this later. We don't have to, it's like talking people down, talking people away from the edge, having people understand that really they're caught up in their emotions. And so if that means, look, if I'm here, I got a shoulder for you to lean on, I got an ear for you to talk to. If there's something that you may need, I'll come and get you. We can go to lunch and talk about this and buy time. That's what we train to do, is buy time between the incidences. And when a person is angry, it's just like anything else that's shook up. It takes time for it to simmer down.
How do you get a buy-in now, though, from people who may not be experiencing that violence in their communities who say, oh, that's just for them to take care of over in Brooklyn, you know, the suburban guy who's not helping out here.
No, understood. Like ghettos have been created, you know, from like, you know, hundreds of years ago now, where people of a minority live because of social, legal, and economic pressures. You know, like you mentioned, you know, there's certain silos. The whole city, unfortunately, is not dealing with this violence. But I will caution, violence is a disease. And if it's not addressed properly at its root causes, it can spread into the affluent areas, as we are now witnessing.
Has the NYPD embraced what you're doing?
I would say now more than ever. We've been getting a lot more support from the NYPD now more than we've ever had in the last, you know, since we came into the city with the model called Cure Violence Global, which comes out of Chicago back in 2009 to today. We're now about close to over 10 years of doing this violence interruption work on the ground. At the initial stage, of course, the NYPD, they did not understand us. They didn't understand how we were going to be able to play an important role. Today, I believe that we're gaining more of their respect. The people who are closest to the problem are the best ones to come up with the solutions. And you're not going to be able to police your way out of this. You're going to need the community, and that's what this work that we do represent. It's a community-driven approach.
I read an article from back in, I think it was like 2013 in the Times. It talked about how you had gone like about a year without any killings.
Absolutely.
Can you do that for the city with this program? With what
I believe so. The evidence is out there. You know, we have evaluations that actually been conducted by major universities that actually talk about the effectiveness of these type of models. Literally, like you spoke about in the 2013 New York Times example, was we went 1,000 days without a shooting and a killing in an East New York community. You know, that was unheard of at that time. We're talking about where the 75th precinct, one of the most busiest precincts in all of New York, actually patrol. And so for us to have that type of success by simply, you know, meeting the community where they are, coming up with models and strategies that complement the existing community, using people like credible messengers, like myself, people who have been there and done that, employing them, giving them meaningful employment, living wage jobs, and then training them up to be professionals and experts at things that they always had all their lives, which is influence, and deploying them back into the same neighborhoods from which they grew up, where they're most known, and they have the respect amongst those other individuals who are now trying to live a lifestyle that they once lived. That type of approach does work, and the evidence is out there. We have way more interruptions and actual preventions than there are homicides. If you think about it, Mike, the city now, we are citywide. We have hundreds of boots on the ground that conducts hundreds, if not thousands, of mediations per week. If these interruptions are not happening, where people like myself are getting at incidences while it's at its incubated stage, these things, if left alone, will erupt into maybe a gun-related homicide, which means that we'll be almost maybe twice at where we are now in terms of homicides, if not 3 times. So I think that is a lot of evidence.
You don't hear about the interventions.
You don't hear about the interventions. It's not popular because unfortunately in the media's eyes, if it bleeds, it leads. And so it's not something that they report on. The community activities, the amount of events that we hold in the community, the amount of people that we engage in the community is stepping up, and they are doing their part, but it's not something that unfortunately gets the make the evening news.
Okay, great. That's going to have to be the last word. Great topic, though. Boy, a lot of importance to all of us here on that. I want to thank our guest, A.T. Mitchell, the co-chair of the new Gun Crime Prevention Task Force. Wish you nothing but the best in your efforts to help curb the gun violence that has infected so many neighborhoods in our city. Thanks again. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with something new and exciting we'd like to share with you. I'm Mike Gilliam. This is Let It Rip.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back. We've talked about the wave of gun violence sweeping across the country and through our streets and communities. And while elected officials here are trying to put an end to it, it's very difficult to get meaningful gun legislation out of Washington, largely because lawmakers won't act. And that's because it's politically dangerous. The gun lobby, including the National Rifle Association, or NRA, wields so much power in the Republican Party, they're reluctant to act. Take a look at this live performance from reggae artist Ras Droppa as he shines a light on the NRA. I'm Mike Gilliam. We'll see you next time on Let It Rip.
The NRA acting blind to the gun crisis situation is an epidemic affecting the nation, destroying human population. NRA don't give a damn, his intention is to sell $1 billion of his gun and his ammunition. National Rifle Association, stop the distribution of your weapons, killing us off by the million. Blood money in your pocket, you're a rich man. The gun control yourself to every nation. If you live by the gun, you will die by the gun. And when they bust it, why run for it? Gunshot will take your life any minute. NRA acting blind to the gun crisis situation is an epidemic affecting the nation, destroying human population. NRA don't give a damn, his intention is to sell $1 billion of his gun and his ammunition. National Rifle but mama put her hand on her head when I want Sunday. From a stray bullet to the head, just an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. So next time you dip on the corner, make sure look over your shoulder for murderers, trigger happy cowboys with guns in disguise. NRA